Exactly 10 years ago I switched to Sony Cameras, and in today's video I'ma share my experience with my 8 Sony cameras and 22 lenses for Sony cameras that I've owned throughout those years. And also we'll discuss the pros and cons of using the Sony cameras for filmmaking. This video is about to get nerdy and pretty long, but still it would be very fun. Let's go! What's good guys, my name is Oleg Nikitin and you're watching No Limits On channel. So why did I switch from Canon 6D and 650D to my Sony a7S II? First of all, the Canon 6D had pretty poor image quality, only 1080p, and it wasn't really good. No 4K for sure. It also was pretty bulky because it was a DSLR camera, not the mirrorless camera, and the autofocus performance wasn't great, so I had to manually rack focus with my lenses. Also 10 years ago I've been watching a lot of Philip Bloom's videos about Sony a7S original and the a7S II when it came out, and it was crazy good. And I was one of the first people in my hometown who bought the Sony camera, and all of my friends videographers also bought Sony cameras in like 1 year or 2 years from then, and I had to teach all of my friends on how to use the Sony cameras, set the cameras up, different settings, etc. and it was a pain in the butt, to be honest. And then I decided to make a YouTube channel. My first thoughts of making a YouTube channel were back then because I had to customize each and every camera once in a while, and I thought that making a YouTube channel would be much easier, so I could just send the video to my friend and he would customize the camera, as I do always. And at first let's talk about the advantages of Sony cameras, then I'll talk about different cameras that I owned, then about the lenses, and finally about the disadvantages. And the first huge advantage to me was the reliability of Sony cameras, because throughout all of those 10 years I only had like 5 to 7 glitches, and once my SD card failed, but I had the second card installed and had backup. Also, because of a very tiny flange distance, the distance between the sensor and the lens mount itself, we can adopt a ton of different lenses like vintage lenses, Canon EF lenses, etc, etc. And only one company is doing better in this regard. This is Nikon, because you can adopt Sony E lenses to Nikon Z, but not vice versa. And for example, L mount and Canon RF mount have not as many options in terms of adopting different lenses. Still a lot, but not a ton. The next huge thing to me was the size and weight of Sony cameras and the size and weight of the glass itself, because after Canon DSLR cameras, you can imagine that those tiny cameras were like a blessing for my back. And to this day, the cameras and lenses from Sony are one of the smallest ones on the market. The next huge thing to me is the autofocus performance, and as you know, the modern Sony cameras are one of the best ones on the market in terms of autofocus performance. For example, the Sony ZV-e1, which is filming me right now, it has godlike autofocus. Yes, the a7S II and the a6300 didn't have like super reliable autofocus, but all of the modern Sony cameras, especially with the AI tracking module, they are just great. At first, the battery life wasn't the greatest, especially in the a7S II and a6300, they had smaller batteries, but every camera that has the bigger battery, like the FZ100, which is not installed in my Sony camera for some reason, they have really good battery life at up to 2 hours in 4K recording. The next advantage is the amount of customizability. The buttons, the dials, and the quick setting menu is a blessing. I never had any issues with customizability, even with smaller cameras like the ZV-e10 Mark II. It has enough of customizable buttons so I can work reliably and easily in the field. And because of the Sony marketing team, we can also get pretty cheap camera with a super nice sensor. For example, Sony ZV-e10 Mark II with the sensor from Sony FX30, or the ZV-e1 with the sensor from the FX3, FX6, Sony a7S III for really cheap. Plus, most of the Sony cameras that came out like 3 to 5 years ago, they have 4K up to 50 frames per second, some of them with a crop and 10-bit recording, which is great for filming in S-Log, and I've been filming solely in S-Log 3 for the last like 6 years, I guess. And the image quality and colors is just spectacular. And now a few words about the Sony cameras that I did own throughout those 10 years. My first Sony camera was the Sony a7S II. It had pretty good 4K recording at up to 30 frames per second, and still it was the low-light king, as you might imagine, with the Sony a7S III FX3. And this camera had pretty poor battery life, not super reliable autofocus, but still I was really happy with the camera. I had really nice footage, and most of the time I was actually shooting in 1080p, 50 frames per second, because I love to slow down the footage in post. And still guys, as you can tell from the footage, this camera was capable enough to give me outstanding footage, at least for 2016. The next camera was the Sony a6300, and it was my B camera and the gimbal camera, and I only shot with this camera in 4K 25 or 30 frames per second because it had pretty cool like 6K downsample to 4K footage quality, a huge rolling shutter, pretty poor battery life, and also it was overheating a ton, so I had some issues with the overheating as well. But still, as the second camera, it was very cool, and even the terrible rolling shutter wasn't an issue for me because I shot hundreds and hundreds of dancing videos with that camera. And then I purchased my first cinema camera, which was the Sony FS7. Yes, it was huge, it was bulky, it had internal NDs, but it was able to record at 4K up to 60 frames per second in 10-bit, and also it was able to record in S-Log. And at that period, I was studying the S-Log and getting this amazing footage with this camera. Also, I had to reimagine the way I shoot with this camera. I did a lot of handheld shooting, and as you can tell from the footage, it can be really cinematic. I did sell this camera because I moved to another city and it was pretty bulky and heavy to carry around the huge city that I live in right now, and also the A7S III came out and it was better in almost each and every way, especially in the autofocus department, which wasn't actually working properly on the FS7. It was super unreliable. And the A7S III is to this day one of my favorite cameras of all time, and I think it is still relevant in 2025 for filmmaking because this camera had everything. Good battery life, 4K up to 120 frames per second, also pretty reliable autofocus performance. All in all, the colors, the performance, the image quality, everything was great about this camera. But unfortunately, back in 2023, my backpack with $10,000 worth of gear was stolen in Italy and the A7S III was there. That's a pity, guys. And then I bought the FX30 as my main camera, and I did use the FX30 exclusively, so the aps-c camera, throughout about 8 to 9 months before I did purchase the ZV-e1, which has the same sensor as the A7S III. Now let me say that the FX30, especially in combination with the Sigma 17-40 f1.8, is a killer B camera, and it can deliver pretty stunning image quality, as you can tell from those examples that I'm showing to you right now. I still think that this camera is the most reliable B camera or C camera to this day. Yes, the image quality is slightly grainier and the dynamic range is slightly lower than on the Sony A7S III, for example, but still the image quality is superb. And I really missed the Sony A7S III, but I didn't have the budget to buy a new one, so that is why I purchased the ZV-e1 for about $1,500. And for this price, this camera, it was secondhand obviously, this camera is simply stunning. It's even better than the FX3 and A7S III in terms of autofocus performance. It doesn't lose autofocus, the eye autofocus, when you do the clear image zoom functionality. It has a couple of extra cool features, and all in all, this camera provides you with the greatest image quality you can get in the Sony cameras in terms of video recording, at least in my opinion, and you still can work around the drawbacks that this camera has, like the overheating. The cooling fan is an obligatory thing with this camera, but it didn't overheat on me really often. And also I do record backup to my Atomos Ninja 5 recorder with this camera, and this is a killer combo, as you can imagine. And then I purchased the ZV-e10 Mark II camera, which has the same exact sensor as in the Sony FX30, and this camera is super nice for the third angle as a C camera or as a backup camera. Yes, it doesn't have IBIS, but still it's like a tripod camera most of the time, and it's super cheap, like dirt cheap to be honest. Right now in my country you can purchase the brand new one without a kit lens for like $750, maybe, okay, $900. And lately, just out of curiosity, I did purchase the Sony NEX-5. This camera is actually 15 years old, it's from 2010. It has 14 megapixel sensor and I only use it for photos, and it has like a filmic look and vibe to those photos. Really like this camera, but it's only for fun pictures in my travels. And also guys, right now on the screen you can see all the lenses that I did own throughout those 10 years, and almost to each and every lens I have a review on my channel. So if you do see something interesting for you, you can search on my channel for a certain review of a certain lens, because if I start to describe each and every lens even in a couple of words, this video will be super long. So if you're curious guys, just find a review on my channel. And now guys, let's talk about the disadvantages of the Sony cameras, and I really wish that they will fix it in the future cameras. First and foremost, the XAVC-HS codec. Please guys, give us 25 and 30 frames per second in XAVC-HS or the H.265 codec. Everybody has it, but not the Sonys for some reason, and I love H.265 because of the file sizes, and still the image quality is just superb. The second irritating thing is about the Sony's marketing system. When the new camera comes out, it has a lot of great new features, but the cameras that are older, they don't get those features for a very long time or at all. For example, the Sony A7S III did get the built-in LUTs, so you can preview the log footage with your own LUT, and it get the firmware update about 4 years after the launch. But I guess it's just a marketing strategy guys, and I think it'll stay the same. Also, a lot of the cameras on the market right now have open gate recording, like the Panasonic cameras for example. Even the iPhone 17 Pro Max now can record in ProRes RAW in open gate mode as well, and I wish that Sony cameras will implement open gate recording as well, because it's a super handy. For instance, when I shoot wedding workshops that my wife organizes in Europe, I always do the horizontal shot and the vertical shot from the same horizontal for reels and shorts. And the resolution is okay for socials, but still I wish I had a bit more room, especially when I was using the FX30 with the 17-40 lens, and it's a bit limited in terms of the wide angle. I wish I had some more extra space on the top and bottom of my image so I can get better reels afterwards. And also anamorphic filmmaking would be much more fun with the proper open gate recording, so we don't have as narrow field of view as in the 16:9 plus anamorphic lenses with 1.5x squeeze ratio, for example. The next disadvantage is the work of third-party lenses in terms of the IBIS with the Sony cameras. Only the native Sony lenses like this 20-70 f4G lens, they work properly with the IBIS system of Sony cameras, and this is the restriction which is made by software, by Sony themselves, and I think they'll keep it the same because this is the way they can sell more native lenses. But with third-party glass you can only set manually the focal length. For example, if you use an 85mm, you just set it up to 85 and you have slightly better stabilization in this regard. But with zoom lenses, it's a different story. You are not able to set the focal length each and every time, and you have what you have. Basically, with this combination of the FX30 and 17-40, I cannot shoot handheld without micro jitters, and it's really irritating. I have to stabilize each and every shot in post, even though I'm using the active stabilization with this combo. And the final disadvantage to me is the work of the HDMI output signal when you set it to HDMI info display. You get super tiny display with black bars on left and right, and it's not getting any bigger, plus the camera display itself disables, and it's really a pain in the butt. A lot of different cameras and manufacturers are having much better HDMI output signal and HDMI info display mode, so I wish Sony will change it in the future cameras. And finally, guys, we have a lot of pretty cool new cameras on the market, like the Panasonic S1 Mark II or the Nikon ZR or something else. And do I plan to change the system in the nearest future? And my answer is no, because I'm really happy with my Sony cameras, with the optics that I have with lenses, and I do know each and every nuance of each and every camera I own, and I can get really stunning footage with the S-Log. I do know how to work with this footage in post, and I'm just super comfortable with my system, and the best tool that you have is the tool that you know from top to bottom, and this is what I do with my Sony cameras. So I'll stick to Sony as for now, and let me know which cameras do you use and why, and for how long you've been shooting with Sony if you do. And if you did enjoy this video, smash the like and subscribe buttons and hit the notifications bell. And right here I have a guide for beginners which Sony camera to buy for your particular needs for video or for stills. See you in that video, guys. Take care. Bye.